It's like, how do you just not read? How do you just not read?
Yeah, it's a very basic thing.
Well, I even feel like when you're reading, you start understanding and listening to and being aware of other kinds of ways that people live, even if it's fantasy.
Welcome. You are entering into a strange dimension. A dimension where narratives from across space and time come together. Narratives that could have, might have, or should have been all exist here in one space. This is Cinecasters Ultimate Timeline.
Okay, welcome to Cinecasters Ultimate Timeline. This is the very first episode. I am Janglez the Strange, or Andrew, of course, and today I'm joined by Nathaniel.
Hi, yes, I'm Nathaniel.
And so today's episode, we are going to be doing the 2015 Fantastic Four movie, or the Fant4stic, I think people on the internet are calling it. I don't know who directed it.
It's Josh Trank.
Josh Trank directed
who
it.
also directed Chronicle.
I'm not familiar with that movie.
Which is like a mockumentary where people, these teenagers, get superpowers.
Oh, actually, that sounds pretty interesting.
It's an interesting film.
Okay,
Yeah. It's a good film.
Okay. Let's step right into it. First, I want to see what your thoughts are on the film without me asking. So what were your thoughts on the film? I know I got a text from you when you watched it, but
yeah.
What were your thoughts on the film?
Oh, that's a mess.
So, what did you like? What didn't you like?
Well, for starters, pretty much the whole thing was kind of a mess, if not an entire blubbering mess. So what didn't I like? I thought the whole
if you didn't like a lot of it, what did you like then?
What did I like? Okay. There was one idea that was introduced. They only threw it out there, and I went, "Oh, that's interesting." Maybe it's just because that's something I'm thinking about. But it's Susan or Sue introduces the idea of there are patterns and everybody has a pattern, and so she essentially questions Reed Richards' motivation for why he's he's studying.
Yeah, like this whole idea that humans are habitual creatures, and so if you break them down, they're the same kind of patterns as even if like fractal patterns, but like on a larger level, like habitual patterns.
Yes.
Yeah. You can break those down into mathematical algorithms and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what was cool about it is she's questioning his motivation. So it's like, oh, that could be an interesting direction where you're the main character, especially with a superhero movie, because the whole idea with the superhero genre is you're presenting a moral ideal of something,
or sometimes an anti-hero. Yeah, but like still always a moral ideal. So an anti-hero goes through, like Logan, where an anti-hero goes through this whole shift in ideals, versus like other superhero movies are like this moral ideal that is thrown against an amoral idea, and both of those are the antagonist and the protagonist.
Yeah, exactly. So a classic example is The Dark Knight, where you have like Batman who upholds this certain model of virtue, and then the Joker comes along, and that whole movie is challenging Batman's ideals.
Right, yeah.
And that's what good, in my opinion, if we're going to get into like the science of genre, that's what I believe makes an interesting superhero movie. So they set it up and then ignored it for the
That's
rest of this
interesting
movie.
Because the thing that I actually thought was the best about this movie wasn't even a thing in the movie. It was actually just the portrayal of a few of the characters.
Oh, okay.
I thought that Miles Teller as Reed Richards was amazing.
Okay.
I actually thought his portrayal of Reed Richards was the best portrayal I've ever seen. Like, he plays Reed as like incredibly smart, but also like nerdy and geeky and kind of awkward, but without being like a classical nerd. Do you know what I mean? Like without being like I'm Poindexter, like look at my pocket protector. You know what I mean? But he's intelligent, but he's slightly socially awkward. And I thought Miles Teller did a great job as that. The second thing that I really enjoyed was I can't remember the actor's name, but the guy who played Michael B. Jordan. Michael B. Jordan as Johnny Storm.
Yeah.
Even though Johnny doesn't really get a lot of screen time and isn't really overly utilized, Michael B. Jordan plays Johnny Storm like amazing in that movie. Like, he's got so much depth that's there that we never see. And so I think what actually is going on is you can see that there's almost two different caliber of actors. Like in Miles Teller and Michael B. Jordan are both like they're big actors now, and I think they were somewhat big at the time. And then the only other big actor in that movie is the guy who plays Franklin. Franklin Storm. That's Sue and Sue's adopted father and Johnny's father.
Yeah,
he's the only character who's like, or only actor who's another big name. And so for me, actually, you can see the difference between Johnny and Reed in their actors over just the other characters. And so for me, it was like, that's what I was so disappointed with how bad this movie was, because those two actors did such a great job. Like, I don't know if you've seen Whiplash.
Yeah. Whiplash is amazing.
Right. And that's Miles Teller, right? And
well, he's a good actor.
So that's what I'm saying. I think like, even though the movie is kind of a big garbage fire, there's the actors who are good actors still do something with it. Because for me, I actually thought Susan was the worst part of that movie as an actress.
Yeah, well,
she's flat.
Well, what's interesting is I thought they were all equally flat, but I felt that it wasn't a fault on the performer's part, because they've been in other movies where they've performed well.
Yeah,
I think it was just the content.
I've never seen in Susan or anything else. The actress who plays Susan,
Kate Mara, Kate Mara, who's also in House of Cards. That's what I'm more familiar with. That was, she played a reporter.
I haven't seen House of Cards, but House of Cards is really well written. So
yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, she basically, like, I felt with Fantastic Four, it was just a case where the interactions were just very flat. The other thing, people are way too nice in this movie.
Yeah, it's weird. We'll get into it.
Like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
But I also felt like when Johnny and Johnny and Reed were interacting with each other, it felt real. And I felt like Victor Von Doom was way more fleshed out than he was in the original Fantastic Four, like the Fantastic Fours from the early 2000s.
Oh, the one was Jessica Alba and
Ian Grufford and Dr. Doom is just this like villain.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Whereas I felt like Victor could have been fleshed out more.
Oh yeah, that was actually one thing which I thought was interesting. They gave him early on in the movie they planted the seed where he had an outlook on life and this disdain towards people that actually made sense.
Yeah, he's actually, to me, he's one of the best characters in this movie.
I would agree.
He's kind of
felt
silly.
like he had the most potential.
Yeah, but he's kind of silly, but yeah. So anyway, the other last thing that I wanted to bring up in thoughts was, did you know that the last 20 minutes of this movie, roughly 20 minutes, are actually all a reshot?
I wondered how much of it was actually reshot.
Yeah, so apparently the studio didn't like the ending that was originally written.
Okay.
And nobody has ever seen it. Nobody knows what that ending looks like.
Oh, wow.
But if you look closely, you can see that Susan Storm's actress is wearing a wig because she dyed her hair or something, because she had moved on to another project.
Right.
But then the reshoot happens, and you can see like that whole ending with like the portal opening in the sky, and it feels like a completely different movie, and like the lighting is different, and you can tell a lot of it's done in front of a green screen.
Oh yeah.
And
this really epic CG.
The movie all of a sudden goes from being this like sort of almost plotting sci-fi. It almost feels like Battlestar Galactica, like where they're building a gate into another dimension.
Yeah.
And it has this like sci-fi feel to it, and it goes from that to all of a sudden in the last 20 minutes, it's like we can all work together and put our side of differences. But like Reed Richards, who is this smart character, starts just spouting like plot devices. You know what I mean? Where he'll just be like, it's an other dimensional portal pointing to the portal in the sky. And you're like, duh. Like, you're Reed Richards. Like, say something intelligent. Like, give us some insight. Don't just point out plot points.
Right.
And actually, in the last little bit where the fight scene's happening, the only person who talks is Reed, and it's all obvious information. Everybody else is sort of just like yelling encouragement to each other, or like battle grunts. You know what I mean? It's sloppy. But I was wondering if you knew that, because the director was really upset with those reshoots, because he had I mean, obviously as a director you have a thought in mind, a film in mind, and the studio apparently stepped in and was like, psych.
Right. Well, I don't know the whole story. I know that there was something political that happened with the director. I don't know if it's the same guy, Josh Trank.
Political.
Well, I don't mean like in
this
terms
Me
of
Too
politics.
movement?
No,
Okay.
nothing like that.
Okay.
It was just I'm talking like politics, work politics, where there was a disagreement
in the studio.
within the studio. They didn't like the
production
direction
or
he was going.
something,
There was some speculation that the director wasn't ready. I don't know. It's all rumors, right? But
yeah. Okay.
the story I heard was that he was given this project, and there was some speculation that he wasn't ready to direct it yet, and was going way over budget, and it was a mess from the start.
That's really interesting.
From what
I hadn't heard any of that, but I was interested to know if you had heard about the reshoot and what your thoughts on the reshoot were.
I didn't
You're
know
a
that specific.
filmmaker yourself.
Yeah.
So have you ever?
Have
You've dealt with companies
I've
that
dealt
are
with companies
that are like,
that
hey,
are
we
jerks.
love your vision, and then you go out and film it, and then they're like, actually, we love it, but we're not going to use it.
Yeah,
or,
exactly.
Or actually, we don't love it.
Yeah,
so I was
it
curious
happens.
as like what you thought about the whole 20 minutes feeling like almost like a different genre within the movie, and that's where it feels like garbage to me.
Oh well, I mean, even way before that, it was.
It's a mess. But like that ending still feels so irritating.
It kind of, the stakes are escalated into the realm of absurdity.
It's like they jumped the shark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's now the whole universe is at stake.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're gonna open this quantum portal and destroy the fabric of space time.
Right. Yeah. Like,
and we're gonna just blow everything up.
and
And it's like, oh, Fantastic Four!
Now
Thank
you're a thing.
God, you're
Yeah.
here to save the day.
Yeah.
In this
Okay.
weird other dimension.
Yeah. Okay. That was weird. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't
I won't
quite
get
fly,
started.
but
Yeah, the whole other interdimension thing didn't
yeah,
work for me.
I'm gonna get to that for my pitch, but let me do a quick summary for everyone.
Oh yeah,
just
we
to get
haven't
you up
really
to date.
explained what the show.
Well,
we're
I'm
doing.
assuming most people, but in case you haven't seen it in a while, I'm gonna do a quick summary just for everyone. So this is a summary for the 2015 Fantastic Four. So the audience is introduced to a young but brilliant boy named Reed Richards, who quickly makes friends with another boy who is from a poor and it's assumed to be an abusive family. This kid's name is Ben Grimm. The two of them bond over an experiment that causes a minor blackout to occur. It's kind of funny, ha ha ha. And then many years later, we see both boys have grown up and are showing one of Reed's inventions at a science fair. The invention doesn't seem to work, causing general mayhem, again to comedic effect, but does attract the attention of Franklin Storm, who invites Reed to study at the Baxter Foundation. There, Reed meets other brilliant student, Susan Storm and Johnny Storm and Victor Von Doom, are the most important ones, and they are attempting to build a larger version of Reed's science fair project, which seems to be capable of interdimensional travel. When the project is finished, it is revealed that they will not be the ones to be traveling in it. After getting drunk, Doom, Johnny, and Reed decide to go that night into the machine. Reed calls up Ben to join them, and Susan attempts to stop them from going in the machine. While in the other dimension, all the members are affected by a mysterious energy source. Everyone makes it back out of the dimension except for Victor Von Doom, who is believed to be dead. At this point, the military steps in to take control of all four of the survivors, who seem to be exhibiting abnormal physical abilities. While in captivity, Reed escapes and promises Ben he will return to help him. A year later, Ben and Johnny seem to be embracing their abilities with the promise of a cure in exchange for military work. Susan, who is more hesitant, agrees to help locate Reed, who has gone off the grid. Reed is brought back under military control just in time for Victor Von Doom, now as Dr. Doom, to reappear and attempt to destroy the whole planet with some kind of interdimensional hole in the sky. The four put aside their differences and defeat Dr. Doom, and then move into a new building as the newly formed Fantastic Four.
Well, this is the best part. They're like, we need a name.
We need a name.
Oh, and then Ben says something about, this is fantastic, and then Reed goes,
Say that again?
Say that again? Yeah. What should we call ourselves?
The Fantastic
End of
Five.
movie,
Yeah.
and then...
Well, I'm okay with it never being said. Like, that's okay.
It was way better with it not being said.
But
it
I
was
think what they
still
were trying to
bad.
do was, like, pull off, like, at the end of the Avengers... they did something similar at the end of the
But
Avengers.
it was funny.
Yeah, they did. They also did something similar at the end of the Avengers Age of Ultron.
Oh, I haven't
where
seen
all
that
the
yet.
old Avengers sort of scatter off.
Oh, okay.
And then we're left with, like, Vulture and Scarlet Witch and all the new Vision, all the new Avengers. And
Right,
Captain goes, Avengers? And he never says it.
Oh,
Like, it
that's
cuts him
awesome.
off right before he says assemble.
Right.
You know he's going to say it.
Right.
And I thought that was better in that movie than it was.
It's for comedic effect.
Yeah, so you had never seen this movie before.
I hadn't until yesterday.
Do you want to start with your pitch first? Or would
Oh
you like
yeah.
me
Do we
go
want to
first?
explain like that's also what we're doing?
Oh
or-
yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline is this idea where we watch a movie and then we make it good.
Yeah.
We pitch it so that we take the major themes of and sort of plot lines of the movie and say like, hang on a sec, that is hot garbage. Let's not do that, and instead let's do this. So Nathaniel and I haven't discussed the movie at all beforehand.
Nope.
In terms of what our pitches are. So we're hearing these for the very first time.
That's right.
So I'm wondering if you want to go first or if
I can go first.
All right, why don't you go first?
yeah.
and we'll pitch your idea. So.
Okay, so one thing I did want to build off of, I thought the whole giving Doctor Doom motivation in terms of his disdain for people. He talks in the current version of Fantastic Four. He talks about how maybe humans shouldn't survive, and maybe we have created this mess and our time is up. I thought that was an interesting idea for Doctor Doom. So my idea for Fantastic Four actually opens with a it'd be maybe a 10-minute, 20-minute sequence that starts with Doctor Doom as a young adult.
Well, so it's almost like Doom is the main character.
So it starts off with him as the main character, but then it goes back to them. But the whole thing, I had this idea of him traveling Southeast Asia. I just thought that would be
as a young adult.
Yeah, as a young adult, before he's met Reed Richards and before he's met Sue and all the others. It actually starts with him. I was actually going back to some of the original origin story. It was stealing a little bit from the other, the original origin story where I think he's an orphan, or he essentially leaves his family. It's actually really bizarre. Like there's a lot more mystical components. So
Dr. Doom.
Dr. Doom.
Yeah, because he's like the king
of some other
what is it
like
called? Latveria?
I want to say Latvia,
No,
but
it's Latveria.
Not Latveria.
It's like Latvia and Bavaria.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Latveria, and he's the king of it, but he doesn't want to be, so he leaves.
That's what it is.
And then gets magic powers, and then he comes back. So the reason Doctor Doom in the Marvel comic book universe, Doctor Doom is considered to be one of the most craziest villains.
Exactly.
He is tops. So we talk about Loki or Thanos pulling the strings, right? But Doctor Doom would actually be making it look like Thanos was the bad guy, but really he's manipulating Thanos.
Yeah, exactly.
Doctor Doom is considered one of the best, the craziest villains.
And that's where I thought that was the potential for the character. Is he is this evil genius essentially. And so my idea was that before he leaves his home, we never see where it is, but he's traveling and he sees this young girl begging on the side of the road, and he's about to give her money, and someone says, no, don't give it to her. He says, why not? And he says, well, that money's not going to go to her. It's going to go to the person who's exploiting her condition. And then Dr. Doom, who's just Victor at this point, has been staying at a monastery, and he's in the monastery, and then he's talking to one of the monks, and he says, I'm actually going to go back to where I came from. I'm going to go to America, and I'm going to study medicine. I'm going to fix things. And then the monk says, that's very good. Just be careful that the world doesn't change you before you try to change the world. And then he goes, and
is that the sort of crux of the whole?
And then, then it cuts to him later. He's got these scars, and then he puts on the mask, and then it goes into the story of them in university.
Oh, so it's almost bookended. So we see this intro to Doctor Doom, and then we see the end of Doctor Doom, and then we go back into the sort of how did he get there?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I like that. Okay,
yeah. So essentially, it's almost more of an origin story for him, but then it gets into being more about them. But that's the whole question. That was what I was going to build off from what was already there. Was that whole idea of why does Doctor Doom hate the world? Why does he want to destroy it? So then in university, he and Susan Storm and Reed Richards are in university together. They're all brilliant minds, and they're all working on similar things, similar-ish, but Victor and Sue are doing more biology, and Reed Richards is doing something that's more on a micro. He's trying to do something more with like quantum physics, but it's all on this micro level.
Okay.
But he's trying to get to something more in terms of the origin of life. Actually, he's trying to. I got pretty specific with it. He's basically trying to create a device that can change elements.
So like alchemy, but science.
Yeah,
alchemy.
exactly, science alchemy. And they are also trying to do something that allows for curing of genetic diseases, and they all end up working together. But what ends up happening is, Victor is interested in Sue. She ends up falling in love with Reed Richards, so he's a little jealous of that. And then also Reed Richards ends up stealing an idea from their research to make his research work. Now, Victor Von Doom gets mad about this. Sue doesn't mind because she's like, but still, it's for the greater good. Like, she's more interested in helping people. But Reed Richards takes the idea for his own experiment. But she also calls him out on it and says, are you really... I'm going back to the idea that's in there. And she says, are you actually doing this to help people, or are you just in this for your own sake?
That's awesome.
And so that was where I thought would be interesting.
Well, and that plays back to your theme of don't let the world change you before you change the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that was where but Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom have similar motivation in the beginning, where they both actually are in it for themselves. Well, actually, Victor Von Doom actually does have good motivation. He really wants to fix things. And he's just...
So you're talking about like a switch where Doom has good motivations and then changes to having bad motivations, whereas Reed has bad motivations but changes to having good motivations.
Yes.
Like by the end of the movie.
But but I would actually argue that in my version, Von Doom still has good motivations. Technically, he's just doing... He's basically
a little jaded.
Yeah. So what ends up happening? They go through university. Their research gets published. Reed Richards is the one that becomes the famous of the three, but they all end up working together on this project that they're going to do. And in the course of, and then Ben becomes a part of it. And in my version, Ben is not some dummy. He's also a smart guy too. And they bring him in to help manage the lab. And then Johnny Storm is also, he's Sue's brother, but he's also gone to school and he's also a very capable mind. So they all end up working together on this project. And this is where the whole science experiment goes bad. And that's how they all get their powers. And then after this, what happens is Doom goes into obscurity and he goes into hiding, and Reed Richards and Ben are taken by the military.
So, the way they get their power, is that the same interdimensional thing?
No, it's not. It's them trying to do this device that's going to transform elements.
Oh,
yeah.
and it winds up changing their biology.
And ends up changing their...
I like that better. Yeah.
But the other thing, in terms of how they got their powers, it's relates to the things that they see about themselves. So by this point in the story, Sue is trying to do her own research, and she feels that she's being pushed to the background, so she's becoming invisible. Victor Von Doom is this massively intelligent guy. But I wrote it down here. I had it all.
But because his powers are like electricity.
Well, the thing is, he doesn't really have in the movie. He doesn't really have powers in the books. His powers are, or in the comic books, he's got more like these mystic powers, but he's just a super genius.
Yeah.
And so my thing is, he's brilliant, but he's also very angry. And then this just intensifies.
It comes out
that
as like energy. Yeah.
With Reed Richards, he has a distorted view of himself and the world, and that's him stretching. And then with Johnny, so Johnny has a short temper, so he catches fire. And then Ben, he feels like he's the truth sayer in the group, and he starts feeling like he's a burden and all this weight, and so that's how he becomes
That's brilliant.
this
each
rock
character has
guy.
a little bit of
So
development.
that's how their powers are associated with them. Anyway, what ends up happening is they end up going into Doom goes into obscurity. He escapes. And the military comes in and basically forces Richards and Ben to be a part of their own project. But Sue and Johnny are able to go off and live their own lives. But they are in hiding. And meanwhile, Doom is essentially... He's becoming this evil mastermind. And his goal then, he comes back and he wants to...
So is he going back to Latveria?
So he actually goes back to... We see him go back to... This is where it goes back to the beginning.
Right.
He goes back to that country and he finds this man who is exploiting these children, and he kidnaps him, and there's a scene where he's talking to him, and is basically, it's leading up to him going, I have to kill you. You're the first person I've ever killed, but I'm doing this because this is the pattern of life is the universe is one constant motion of creation, expansion, and destruction and collapse. And it's only creation through destruction. And I have to kill you in order for me to make a better world. I have to be comfortable with killing people, and you are one of those people who I have to kill. And
Crazy,
so this is the first person that he kills. But he ends up coming back later. And then we don't see him for a while, and then he comes back, and he's this almost like this hacktivist. And his goal becomes
like hacktivist?
Hacktivist, I guess. Yeah. But his goal is to destroy
in order to create.
He wants to basically destroy the entire security infrastructure of the Western world, because he believes the police, the army, all these things are there to protect the rich elites. And if we got rid of them, then everybody else could rise up and build a new society. And so this is what Doom wants to do. And then the Fantastic Four, they step in the way because they go, there are going to be a lot of innocent people who die. And that's the challenge, is he's going, but don't you see I'm actually trying to build a better world? And his means, and he doesn't go through it with using superpowers. He's just brilliant. And so he gets, it's actually kind of more, I was modeling it a little bit more after like the Dark Knight Joker, where the Joker's just a brilliant mind who's very resourceful.
Yeah, but the Joker is more about chaos, where it seems to me like you're trying to do, like, even though Doom has powers, and if there is a fight scene, it would still be great.
Mm-hmm.
But the crux of the story isn't Doom using his powers to kill people. It's him using his genius to kill people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's essentially where... And then the conflict... They end up working together to try and stop him from destroying everything. Even though, on one hand... Because I had actually an idea for a scene where he goes and finds Sue before he's about to do this and says, and it's not a join me or die, it's a join me, because if you don't join me, I can't promise that you'll be protected. And he's like, this is what I'm going to do, and I think this is important. And she says, you're a little misguided. I understand, but there's going to be a lot of innocent people who die as a result, and you cannot bring change about that quickly. That's not how it works. And he goes, watch, I'm going to show you. And then it ends up turning into chaos, and they have to try and stop him.
That's awesome.
That's essentially my my version of what a Fantastic Four movie could have been.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so my biggest thought about that, and I did a note about it, is you're beginning with the whole, like, Doom off in Indonesia, living as a monastery. Or living in a monastery.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was brilliant. The only thing that I want to change about that is, and it's actually the only thing I want to change about your whole pitch, except for one other thing maybe, but the only thing I want to change about your pitch is that at the beginning we see this character and who is Doom, but we never hear him get named. Right. So it's implied that it's Reed.
Oh.
So you think it's Reed, and then, like, after the 10-minute mark, it's like, oh shit, no, wait, that's Doom. Right? Yeah. So it's almost like, instead of being an origin story, like, it's so we think it's going to be an origin story for the Fantastic Four, and it almost winds up being more of an origin story for Doctor Doom instead. So we set up the intro like, oh, I need to bring about change, and then we hear this line like, oh, we hear the crux of the film, don't let the world change you before you change the world. And then it's like, oh, don't worry, I won't. And then he's like, good luck, Victor. And we're like, that's Victor, not Reed. Right?
Ooh.
And I think that's a bit. The other thing I want to change is Doom has this whole idea in the original film, like, not your pitch, but the original film, where he thinks that maybe humans have outlived their point.
Mm-hmm.
And you came back to that. You said, like, humans have outlived the point of survival, and maybe we're not necessary anymore. And I think instead of trying to get rid of this whole security thing, like, maybe Doom's thing is more about, like, maybe it's time to kill off the humans that are feeding on the goodness of others. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe it's time to go back to a more basic time, like, still with the whole defeating the social system, or defeating, like, you know, the system that guards the elite, but more about how to, or with the end goal being, like, those who don't have a purpose beyond making the world a better place no longer have the right to live. Like, if you're just mooching off like this, then it comes back to how the poor girl was begging. She was trying to make her life better, but she was being exploited. Mm-hmm. So only those who are trying to make their life or others' lives better should exist. Anyone else who is exploitative, I think that just makes a better motivation in terms of what we were seeing with the beggar.
Right, that's a bit more specific too. Yeah.
That's the only thing I would change.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
actually, I think those would be good changes for it.
I think I like when I see it in my head and I see this whole thing where you're like, oh, it's Reed sort of maybe before he goes to university, or after high school, before he goes to university, so a young kid, and he's trying to explore the world, as many people do after high school. Explore the world and see how it works, and then all of a sudden you realize that it's not Reed, it's Doom.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to do that is because, as you said, I want to see Doom and Reed flip at the end, where Reed is sort of self-intention and Doom is for the greater good, and see the two of them kind of flip accidentally. Where Reed all of a sudden goes, no, we have to do this for what's better for people, not just for what's going to get me published.
Exactly.
Right? Like, I think it is nice to see Reed be a bit of a glory hound, and Doom be good intentioned. But if we started off with us always thinking it's Reed, and then at the 10-minute mark or whatever, it's Doom, it's like, oh shit, because the two of them are very similar, and it becomes almost this the whole movie, even though with action and drama and political ideologies that are being clashed against each other, at the crux of the whole movie is Victor and Doom are mirrors of each other, and they are letting the world change them, or are they?
Right.
Are they letting the world change them before they change the world?
Exactly.
And that's what I think. That's what the beauty of your story is. That's really good.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, are you ready?
All right. Yeah, I'm excited to hear yours.
Okay, so my pitch is I actually changed less of the story.
Oh,
so
okay.
for me, this superhero, I think this is a very different superhero movie, or could have been, because it focuses more on relationships rather than, like, you went political and whatnot and made things big. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to break down the social structure of society. That's what Doom's thing is. And mine is actually much more about the interpersonalities and relationships between the characters. So the first thing I want to change is, you know how you talked about Ben Grimm being like a smart guy? I want to change that as well.
Right.
He's still from an abusive family. And he's not as smart as Reed by any means, but he's handy. He's quick. He can keep up with Reed. So when Reed explains an idea, Ben isn't like, oh sure, whatever. He's like, oh okay, I get it. Like,
right,
I can follow, and
yeah.
I can help you.
Right.
So it's not just like pity.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, good.
Because it kind of feels like their friendship at the beginning is like Reed needs a friend and Ben needs a friend, and Reed is brilliant and Ben is there.
Yeah, I thought where they were going to go with it was, Reed gets bullied and Ben defends him.
Yeah,
but that
doesn't really
never
happen.
happens.
And that's a little cliche.
Yeah,
so what I want to have happen is we can see a little bit of that, but I want it to be a bit more like Reed comes from a well-to-do family that doesn't understand him and is brilliant. Ben is smart but comes from a poor family. So Ben is smart enough that he could get a scholarship, but because his family doesn't encourage him the way that Reed's might, he's never going to go anywhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's going to stay in that small town. So the major thing, and actually the major theme behind my movie, is the relationship between specifically Reed and Ben, but mostly Reed and everyone else. But Reed and Ben is the big one, and I want to keep that as important, all right? Because they're best friends.
Right.
So when we first meet Ben, we need to believe that Ben helps Reed by being his friend. We need to believe that they would be friends for a reason other than just convenience. Because, like, I think we all make friends when we're young. I mean, you and I, we were friends when we were in kindergarten, right?
Yeah.
So we keep those friends, and I have lots of friends that I know have known from kindergarten, but we don't keep in touch unless our interests are similar. So what's the likelihood that Ben and Reed would stay together if they weren't, like, truly interested in the same things, right? They would grow apart. I don't want them to grow apart. So Ben is smart, but Reed is brilliant, and the two of them have this mutual kinship, and we see that still with this whole flashback scene when they're young. So I think we should actually spend more time with them as kids and let that build a little bit, so that we see that they're actually, like, have something in common. And I think it works really well if we even see Ben's family when he's a kid, how they treat him. Like, they're abusive, not necessarily like physically abusive, but maybe neglectful. You know what I mean? There are more than one kinds of abuse, right? Mm-hmm. And physical abuse is an easy way to just be like, oh, poor kid.
Right.
But neglect or even emotional abuse is far more disturbing to watch and impactful as an audience member. Mm-hmm. But it takes more time to set up. So I think something along those lines. Then we cut ahead to them older, and we do the science fair scene. I think the science fair scene can play off mostly the same way. like where they're like at the science fair and he like breaks the basketball net and stuff like that.
Right.
It can play off
Are
mostly
they
the
still
same way.
trying to build a device to go between
Yeah,
dimensions?
they're still trying to build a device to go between dimensions, and I'll get into that
Okay.
a little bit later. But they're still trying to build a device to go between dimensions, but maybe let's just call it a teleporter instead of an interdimensional device because that's a little hokey.
Right. Okay. Got it.
Maybe they're trying to deal with quantum theory and like being in two places at once. How like in science, it's possible that quarks and like quantum theory dictates that an object at that level can technically exist in two places at once.
Right.
And so maybe they're messing around with that. So it's less about interdimensional travel, but more about like how could we exploit this for teleportation or to be in two places at once or quantum theory, right? But Ben needs to understand more. Like so yes, it's Reed's idea, but Ben helped build it, and it's not just like, oh, my friend Ben helped build it, and then Ben like breaks it at one point because he doesn't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
I did not like that. So in this version, it's like Ben knows what's going on, and Reed is like, the theory is sound. How come it's not working? And Ben's like, oh, maybe I can make a couple more adjustments here or like fine tune things. So again, Ben is smart. But he's hands on smart, whereas Reed is conceptual. You know what I mean? Like quantum theory dictates that if we can do this, math, science,
right,
that kind of thing, big level, and then Reed is like, I get it, I don't really get it, but I can make that happen.
Right, Ben can do that.
Ben can do that. So like Ben is hands on, and the two of them work together well that way. So the science fair scene is fine. Here's the big thing: when Reed leaves when Reed gets into the Baxter thing, we need to have a bit of an emotional scene where Reed and Ben are like leaving. Like Ben is like, you're leaving me. You know what I mean? He's like, you're like my only friend, my closest friend, and you're leaving. And Reed is like, yeah, but like it's an opportunity I can't give up. Like I wish you could come with me. And Ben's like, I can't really afford to go. You know what I mean? Like my family doesn't get it. You know, so we feel for Ben more, right?
Yeah.
We feel for Ben and Reed is like, hey, it's only like 39 minutes away. You can always just train to my place. You know what I mean? You can just get on a train, get off at this station, and the Baxter Building's right downtown New York. Like, it's not that far, right? And Ben's like, yeah, okay, but like, I can't believe you're leaving. Like, this is it, and you're never going to come back. You're going to be a big shot. And so we really feel Ben's emotion, right? And then maybe even when we see Reed leave, we have Ben go home and sort of be like, what now? Right? Back to his abusive family. And we don't even need to like re-emphasize the fact that it's abusive. It could just be like maybe he comes home and nobody's there.
Right.
Like nobody's at home. He's just by himself. There's no Reed anymore.
Right.
See,
but
this emptiness.
We as the audience already have seen everything, and we know what that means for him in that moment.
Right.
So
he no longer had anyone at home, and now he no longer has Reed either.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So then at this point, we sort of leave Ben behind, and I want to see a little bit more of Reed at the Baxter Building. We spend all the time in the lab, but we never see like where does Reed live? Is there a dormitory? What's his resident advisor like? Is it like some kid who's trying to get his PhD at 14 with a stick up his ass? You know what I mean? Like where are the other kids? So this is an opportunity to show like now Reed is among his peers, but he's still socially awkward.
Right.
Like a little, and Miles Teller does a great job of this, like I said earlier. But he's still kind of socially awkward. So he's like interacting with like 14-year-olds who are brilliant, and he's interacting with other people, but he's still kind of socially awkward and stuff like that. So when he meets like Susan and stuff like that, it's still weird for him. He's awkward. So where's the cafeteria? That kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It's an opportunity to have a bit of comedic fun with Reed in a new environment and show what his character is like. Right? Outside of Ben. He doesn't have Ben anymore. So what's Reed's character like? I think it's just a good opportunity for comedy. Yeah. Really. So specifically what I wrote here is we can have this weird dynamic between, say there's like a stern dormitory residence advisor who's like, these are the rules, you don't drink in the dormitory, those kinds of things. And so then we see like Reed's room, and it's like, he's like, wow, I got my own room where I can, where it's not cluttered with science stuff.
Right.
So I see something like that. Like, I think that'd be great.
But then it becomes cluttered with science.
Then it becomes cluttered with stuff. Yeah. So we can say like, wow, it's so neat. And his mom can like maybe make a joke about like it's so much different than your room. And then like a week later, he'll be like, well, so much for that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like an opportunity for some comedic timing.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think is there. So then when we see these friendships blossom, specifically I wrote here that there needs to be a friendship between Reed and Susan, but not a romance yet. It's something we can explore later. But more importantly, it needs to be Reed and Susan get along, but there's not a romance. Friends first.
Okay.
Then we introduce Victor. I think Victor is introduced really, really great, but I think he's a little creepy. Like the way he like deals with Susan, he's like, "Hello, Susan." And she's like, "Hi, Victor. Like you're creepy." So in my version, Victor needs to be arrogant. He needs to think highly of himself, but he's not creepy or mean-spirited. He's arrogant. He doesn't really think highly of other people who aren't brilliant. So he's super and he's jaded, but he's not creepy and he's not mean. And then I think Victor and Reed need to be really close friends. Mm-hmm. They need to become friends first.
I agree. I think so too. Yeah.
So what happens is maybe Victor's a little bit older, but he sees potential. So with other people, he's like so I'm thinking like Franklin comes along and actually pairs Victor up with Reed. And Victor at first is like, I don't take on younger students. Like I don't take on mentees. And Franklin is like, no, I think you'll like this kid. And they get paired up, and instead of just being a mentee, Victor is like, oh shit, Reed is super smart, and they start becoming friends.
Oh,
and
yeah.
what we see is that Victor isn't a mean guy. He just doesn't have time for people who can't keep up with him.
Right.
And Reed can keep up with him. You know what I mean? So Victor will be like, what about this idea? And Reed will be like, oh, okay, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. What if we did this? And all of a sudden Victor's like, this kid is smart. Right, and Victor's like, I see potential. He's my friend. And then we can see Victor has a thing for Susan, and the two of them are maybe even actually dating with Victor and Susan, but
right.
not Reed. Reed's not romantically interested in anyone in this movie.
Right.
Sorry to push your bubble there for anyone who's shipping that out there. So that's the thing. So somewhere during the development of the scene of the machine, they're still building this quantum mechanics machine that's for time travel or whatever. Not time travel, teleportation. We get a scene where we move back to Ben. Ben can't handle being alone by himself in this abusive family, so we see him pack and leave, and he's left for good. He's not going back home, and we can show this visually, I think, without actually saying it, because I think that means more. Mm-hmm. And where would Ben go? Well, he'd get on the train and ride straight to Reed, right? Yeah, so now we get Reed being like, "Oh, Ben, shit, you're my best friend, and you've left home. Like, stay in my dorm room, even though that's against the rules." So now we get more comedic timing with this dorm, RA, residence advisor, who's like, do you have anyone else living in there? Like, it's clearly supposed to be no girls, like that kind of thing. Like, you're not supposed to have girls in your dorm room, and guys aren't supposed to be in girls' dorm room, that kind of thing. But then he's got Ben living in his dorm room and trying to like feed Ben. Meanwhile, he's trying to work on this machine, but he doesn't want to leave his best friend behind. Like, Reed will do anything for Ben. They're best friends. And he's like, I'm not going back, Reed. And so Reed's just like, fuck it, live with me, right? So I think we need to have that, because Ben and Reed need to be important. That's the big thing. And so Reed says to Ben, he's like, okay, whatever, we'll find you a job, we'll find you a place to live in New York, but like I'm not leaving you again. Like, I can see that really hurt you. And Ben's like, thanks, man. So that's really important. So we then sort of have each of Reed's new friends find out about Ben, and they all react differently. Like, say, like Johnny is like, oh, I thought you were a bit of a prude, but you're breaking the rules. Like, I'm down with that. You know what I mean? So now Johnny is on Reed's side.
Right.
And Victor finds out, and he's sort of just like, okay, don't get in trouble. But then, like, as he sees, like, Ben is smart, he's not, like, beneath Reed. Or, say, Ben is not quite as smart as Reed, but because Ben is capable, Victor is like, okay.
Right.
Like, you're not Reed, and you're not Susan, and you're not Johnny, but you're capable, and I respect that. Even if you're not brilliant like the rest of us.
Right.
And then with Susan will be like, you can't break the rules. Like, that's not okay, right? And so we sort of see this rift between Susan and Reed. But, like, so each of them reacts differently, but we bring Ben into the fold. Instead of just having this whole like phone call where he's like, hey, we're going into the machine and you have to be there. I hated that scene. Yeah. It's so
just
dumb.
Walk through the front door.
Yeah.
It'll be okay.
No, so like he's like living like, yeah, so we have to have, and we keep that relationship there. So then when they go into the machine, when the machine is done, Ben actually has a reason to go because he's there. They all get into the machine and we never see the other dimension. So the way I want this scene to play out is they're all in the machine and we see it go like, and they're gone. And then like 10 seconds passed of just like the camera zooming out. And then all of a sudden, they're back and shit's on fire and there's explosions and everything's wrong and Doom isn't in his pit, but we never see the other dimension. It's just we see the chaos of the result. Then the military can step in and Reed is going to leave just like he did. But this time when Reed leaves, he's breaking his promise to Ben. Because Ben had said, you left me once, never leave again. And Reed goes, I'll be back, I promise, I'm sorry, I'll be back. But he leaves. And now Ben is ticked. Reed broke his promise. So same thing, a year later now, and Ben wants to get a cure for his thingness by working for the military. Susan doesn't want to be used, right? And Johnny actually thinks that if he has these powers, he should put them to use, so why not for the military? So each of the characters has their own reason for working with the military. But Susan doesn't want to.
Right.
Reed is off the grid. He's gone. We don't know where he is. So then Susan reluctantly agrees to find Reed off the grid, just like she does with that patterning thing. You don't have to include that. I actually thought that patterning thing was stupid. Because they touched on it enough that it wasn't enough to make it smart.
Right.
So you either have to like mention it just a little bit or mention it more than they did.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Otherwise, it's just stupid.
Yeah, it's just like a weird thing you bring up and you're like, oh, okay.
So anyway, so they managed to find Reed off the grid, and Susan agrees to help them do this, but only if she gets to talk to Reed. So Susan talks to Reed, they track him down, and turns out Reed's been doing research with the ability. And they talk about being used by the military. Like, Reed's like, I can't believe what you guys are doing. You're working with the military. That's not who we are. That's not what we're about. And then some military soldiers show up. Now, Reed didn't know they were there, and Susan didn't know they were going to show up. So now Reed is pissed off at Susan for setting up an ambush for him. But he easily, with his Stretch Armstrong abilities, easily stretches out and defeats these soldiers. No problem for him, right? But then Ben shows up. Ben followed Susan. And Ben is pissed off because he's like, you said you were going to come back. You said you'd never leave. And here we are. Here we are, Reed. Like, you're nothing but a promise breaker. And so now we have this fight between Ben and Reed. This thing versus Mr. Fantastic, with Susan being like, no, stop. Then Johnny shows up as well. And Johnny's like, I work for the military. I'm with Ben on this one. Like, no hard feelings between you and me, Reed. I'm not like Ben, like I'm not pissed off at you, but I work for the military and I'm going to get this done. And Susan is now like, Johnny, you listen to me. So now Susan is pissed off at Johnny, and Ben is pissed off at Susan for protecting Reed. And Reed is pissed off at Susan, and he's feels guilt-ridden over Ben. And now we have this 4-way fight between the Fantastic Four.
Oh,
where like
cool.
Reed is actually like holding off Ben and Johnny, and Susan is caught in the middle trying to protect Reed, but also fight Reed, kind of.
Yeah.
And so we get the four of them are sort of like, it's sort of Johnny and Ben, so the Human Torch and the Thing. Now those are their military code names. That's how they get their names. So the Human Torch and the Thing are now fighting against Reed, who is trying to fight them, while Susan is like, everyone needs to stop it. Like you know what I mean? And we get this. I think that would be an epic fight scene.
Yeah. And it could be pretty funny too.
I don't want it to be funny. I want it to be serious. I want it to be serious. Then Susan finally goes, enough, and she uses a force field and just like boom, and knocks everyone on their asses. And the military takes them all back in. And so that's where the movie ends, is with that big fight scene. And what we're left with is, instead of other movies, like superhero movies that end with like a bright note, we're left with a superhero movie that ends on a dark note, because it sets up the sequel. Because I think there should be a sequel. I think that was always the intention.
Oh, okay.
But this way, what we're left with is, instead of like the Fantastic Fours all together, we're left with like, Ben hates Susan and Reed. Reed feels guilty over Ben and doesn't trust Susan anymore. Johnny is mad at Susan. Susan is mad at Johnny for like, they think they're in it for two different reasons. And we're left with a team that's ultimately super broken. Right? And so now we can show like real growth can happen, because most superhero movies, after the origin story, they don't have any growth.
Right.
So in the sequel,
they got their powers, they're superheroes, and then that's
the sequel. But then the sequel is like, where do you go from here? But in the sequel to this movie, what we could be like is, now we have a broken team that needs to learn to work together.
Right.
And ultimately about their relationships. And because I know people are super into stingers, guess who's still alive in the other dimension?
Howard the Duck.
No, Victor Von Doom. Right? So if you wanted to have him as the villain for the sequel, Victor's still alive in the other dimension. and you could do that as a stinger after the credits, right? And that is my pitch for the Fantastic Four.
Ooh, I like it. I like that I like the relational component to it. Like, because I think what you'd done well is you'd mapped out the actual specific relationships between them in terms of how they actually meet, what the connections are. I do like that the bit between Ben and Reed, that they are close friends. That would actually make it the strongest.
Well, that's what makes sense to
and
me.
that was missing.
The whole plot. The whole plot. Like, I didn't change as much of the plot as you did.
Right. I kind of rewrote.
That's okay. But a lot of the set pieces were still there, like the characters. For me, what I wanted to do is take the initial story and be like, how can we make this work? And really, what it needs to be about the relationships between Victor, Ben, Reed, Susan, and Johnny, and how they all interact with each other.
Exactly.
I just happen to focus mine off on Reed and Ben more than any of the others.
Right.
Because that's, for me, is the crux of the story.
Yeah.
Right? When Reed leaves the military unit, we need to feel like Ben is heartbroken.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So.
Yeah, that was definitely something that was missing, and they tried to they sort of.
Ben,
I don't
Ben
know.
is
It's hard to say. Did they try?
In that movie, Ben is a non-event. There's no reason for him to be in the movie.
It's true. It's very true.
And that
except for
ticks me
him
off.
sucker punching Victor Von Doom into the quantum black hole.
So for me, what I tried to do is instead of having this this quantum black hole dimension in the sky where Doom just shows up and doesn't even talk. Right? Instead, for me, I wanted the end fight scene to be this crazy, like, things are on fire, like, things are getting destroyed. Mr. Fantastic is stretching and fighting, like, all four of them are fighting each other. Boom, boom, boom. With Reed, like, really showing off what, like, because some people are always like, oh, stretchy powers, like, what can you really do with that? And I really want it to be like a visual experience.
Right.
But the visual experience is rooted deeply in the emotions of each character with each other.
Right.
And so the fight scene is both visually stimulating with the fire and the thing and invisibility plus force fields or psychic powers, whichever one she has. I can't remember.
I think it's force fields.
It's force
technically.
fields, yeah. And then Mr. Fantastic is like avoiding flames by stretching, but like his foot is fighting the thing while his upper half is fighting Susan. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, because he can do that kind of stuff, and we could really show that off. And then but it's rooted in emotional stuff, not just like, we need to work together to close the big plot hole in the sky. Yeah. So any afterthoughts about those two pitches?
I think yours is. I feel like yours would actually work well as like a TV pilot.
Oh, thank you. I'd be okay with that.
I think
you know how that. I think for me, TV is actually better than movies because I become more invested in character development than I do in the spectacle, and that's traditionally what movie is the spectacle, right?
Right.
Like, that's what I mean. When TV first came out, we started moving away from character-driven plot and more towards like the big spectacle. Like, that's where we got Ben-Hur and these. Yeah. It was all about how magnificent and how big your budget was to make your movie look the best, because you could otherwise, what would be the point of going to the movies when you can just get it on TV?
Right. Well, that was the thinking, and
that was the thinking. Yeah. But I still think some of that is true. Is that like movies tend to be like an hour and a half to 2 hours to maybe 3 hours,
right?
Of a single plot, versus a TV show tends to be 40. My favorite TV shows are usually 40 minutes of character driven story that happens ideally over 24 episodes.
Right, yeah. I mean, I feel like the same mechanics drive both of them. It's just I think it's also been a budgetary thing that in historically speaking, there's been more money for movies, so they've been able to just focus on all this big spectacle stuff.
I think
TV, and it's actually worked in favor of TV, and I think that's why TV is smarter than movies now.
And that's changing too. Like, look at Game of Thrones. The new season of Game of Thrones that comes out next year or this year or whatever.
That's
the
our
last
plug
season
for HBO.
Yeah, that's our plug. Pay us money. But the new season for HBO, like, each one of those episodes has like the same budget as a film of the same length.
Oh yeah,
like they're paying like $16 to $20 million per episode of Game of Thrones for the final season. That's movie budget stuff.
That's Lord of the Rings budget.
So
for like the first 3
plus inflation, but but that's we're talking movie budget. And I think TV is smarter on the whole, but it's just interesting because like we tend to give movie directors more I guess maybe it's like in terms of art film, and I use that term loosely, but like art film, that independent sort of like, let's make movies that are smart, not just movies that will sell money. Those movies are like critically acclaimed, but nobody watches them. Right. Whereas if you have a TV show that's critically acclaimed, it usually tends to be very smart as well. Like Breaking Bad or the first season of The Walking Dead, like those shows are very smart, and people watch them because they're smart. Whereas like, how often does a movie come out that does well but is also really smart and isn't Christopher Nolan?
And you're making me cry. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know you're a filmmaker, but like there is some truth.
But it's true. It is. Well, because I mean, in terms of the film, just the audience, the movie-going audience is thinned out. It's not as big as it used to be, and the only people that are actually going to draw an audience are people like Christopher Nolan. But even he's doing what's interesting with him is he's doing blockbuster movies, and they are very artfully crafted films. They're like these, he's sort of in this weird, he's been able to achieve this really bizarre thing where he's making big budget art films. I see them as like big budget.
That's exactly what they're like, big budget art films where he's like, hey, I can make an action movie, i.e. Inception or The Dark Knight, but still make it wicked smart.
Exactly.
And I think that's why we see, I mean, we talk about other superhero movies, and I have franchise fatigue over the MCU.
Oh, me too.
Like I'll watch anything with Spider-Man in it, but beyond Spider-Man, I just don't care anymore. Yeah. So I have huge franchise fatigue because even though the movies are smart, they're overdone now. Like everyone's like, well, like let's talk about Thanos and like how Thanos is rooted in utilitarianism, but like Captain is deontology. You know what I mean? Like these philosophical concepts behind like but it's also like, yeah, but Nolan does that better.
Yeah,
like,
well, here's
way better.
Well, here's the other. We've talked about this in terms of how Nolan plays with structure. Like here's one thing that television. I haven't seen television do quite the same yet. In terms of how the cinematic form, I mean, cinema is usually traditionally used with movies, but I don't see why it can't be used in television too.
Well, it's essentially the same.
No, actually, I am disagreeing with myself.
Okay.
Mr. Robot, I think, actually did that.
Yeah, Mr. Robot is a really clever TV show. But like, I find myself whenever somebody is like, "What's your favorite movie?" or "What's your most favorite recent movie?" I find myself actually having a harder and harder time picking a recent movie that's clever. But that's like really smart. Right. The only one that I can think of that came out in the last 5 years that's really smart is actually Inside Out.
Oh yeah,
and it's smart because it like, how do we tell this complex story of or how our brains work for children? That movie is like so it's way smarter than it should be. Yeah, it's so unintentionally smart and like, and not that I think that I don't want to get Pixar. They put a lot of thought into it, and you can tell like, but it's not overthought. It's still a kids movie. But like as an adult, I'm like, oh shit.
But it's not academic.
Yeah. So it's smart, but like, and like, I mean,
but it's still done in a way where you can grasp it as an audience. You don't have to really like. It's funny. It's a smart movie. You don't have to think too much about.
But when you go into it,
the more you think about it, the more you realize.
If you do research into emotions or neuroscience or psychology, what you realize is like everything that they've done in there is super smart and clever. Like It's all done purposefully. And like that's like when we talk about Nolan, like I know you and I really like Christopher Nolan as a director, but like when we talk about Christopher Nolan, he does that all the time. Like everything is purposefully done and it's smart. And I do think Mr. Robot does that as well.
But I would say like Inside Out is maybe a good example of like something that is maybe best done as a movie, because it gets that whole concept, that whole story was probably, it only needed to be 90 minutes long to get the whole, thesis of the story. And whereas something where you're exploring the complexity of a character, like with Mr. Robot, like who is this guy? What's going on in his head? The length that you would require for that lends itself to a television format. And then there's also other characters too that it explores.
Yeah.
And that's
and so my example is usually the first season of Daredevil. Okay. Because the first season of Daredevil is because it's a superhero movie, and we're talking about superheroes, a superhero movie. But B, because it's a TV show that really, it's an origin story for Kingpin, the villain, just as much as it's an origin story for Daredevil, for Matt Murdock. And so in your pitch, when you talked about how like this is almost more of a history, an origin for Doctor Doom than it is for the Fantastic Four, like we can explore the other characters, but I almost think like it's worth exploring the villain just as much as it's worth exploring the main characters. And that's why for me, I think plot-wise, TV shows tend to feel more satisfactory.
Right.
Versus movies tend to, if they're really smart, tend to be really, really well done. But because a movie is only capped at 2.5 hours to 3 hours or whatever, right? You have sort of one concept that you have to explore. And if you don't explore it well, you fail. Right? And so that's why I think, like, when we always come back to Christopher Nolan, every time he does a movie, he picks one topic and he explores it thoroughly and succinctly, but also maintaining its cleverness. And never over analysis.
Well, the other thing too is with good film, and this is why I think directors get credit and why we revere them so much, is because they're playing with the form, the actual form of visual storytelling. And I think part of the reason why up to this point film directors have been getting credit is because the resources have been available for them to experiment like that. Whereas just in terms of the way television is set up.
Do you think Mr. Robot has sort of played with the medium more than any other?
No. I think a show that has played with the medium more than any other show in television up to this point has been True Detective Season 1.
I have not seen it.
Okay, that's one.
Because I would argue that Rick and Morty actually does that a couple times.
Oh, Rick and Morty for sure.
Rick and Morty actually plays with the medium of TV. Specifically, the episode I'm thinking of is Total Recall with the parasites in people's head.
Oh, yeah.
Because we get this scene. The first scene is them showing up, and there's just Uncle Steve. Right. But as a television show, somebody who's watching a television show, we just take this new character for granted because that's often how TV shows introduce a new character. But then Rick straight up just walks in, shoots him in the head, and is like, "There is no Uncle Steve because it's a lie." But that's messing with our whole idea of how the language of film and television works. And they do the same thing with the whole crux of the episode at the end with Mr. Poopy Butthole.
Right.
Because Mr. Poopy Butthole is set up to be a plot device and then isn't.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, that's messing with the language of television to prove an existential point.
Yeah. Well, when I'm talking about playing with the form, I'm also thinking specifically of guys like Nolan, who are also, in terms of the way they're constructing it visually. Nolan will shoot on film and he'll just, it's lit. It's got a certain aesthetic. Like The Dark Knight, like half of it is the story and the structure. The other half of it is the aesthetic in terms of how it's actually executed. And a lot of the reason why that was able to be done the way it was because they had resources to do that.
Yeah. And you don't think television has those kind of resources.
And it just hasn't yet.
Yeah.
But
I think with Game of Thrones
is
we're getting there.
But even Game of Thrones is more like, oh, let's make this like a movie.
Yeah.
And it's still cool. I love Game of Thrones.
So you think we should move towards, or you think you'd like to see it move towards where it's like, let's keep this television show, but let's give the resources to make it the best television show it can be?
Well, like, how can we play with the form? How can we actually experiment with the way we're communicating ideas visually?
Yeah.
And that's where it starts being more interesting.
Yeah.
Like, you can go into
Anyway,
all these classics. But segueing back, because our totally real producer in the corner is checking his
Let's finish up with your final thoughts. What were your final thoughts about the movie? Like, not just your pitch, like, what are your thoughts about the movie?
Oh, the movie?
Yeah.
I was just going to say,
the pitch
I was thinking actually, because in writing it, I one of the things that I felt like I wanted to focus on more was the character aspect, and I'm glad you brought that up for yours.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, this would even make more sense as like a TV show, because you have too many, there's 4 characters, there's 5 characters.
There's 5 characters, because Doom counts. Yeah.
And you cannot explore all of them in a 90-minute, 2-hour movie. Yeah. You're going to miss some things. Yeah. And one of my things, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot, is, and I realized both of our pitches, I think, failed the Bechdel test.
Yeah, but it's hard not to, because Susan.
Exactly. So, but if we did it as a TV show, we could introduce other characters, and that would probably give her character more dimension too.
Yeah, I tried to give her more dimension.
I think you did.
Like, because of the relationships, I tried to give her character a little bit more.
Well, you certainly did, compared to what was already
there. Yeah, but I tried to give her character more autonomy, like make her seem independent. Like,
that's exactly.
She makes decisions for herself, and I also didn't. That's why I didn't want her to be purely romantic.
Yeah.
Like, whereas like Doom
Which
and
is
her,
a good call.
Doom and her might have a relationship, but Reed and her do not at all in this movie, because I think she needs to be a character first and not a relationship to be in.
Exactly. Well, that's just better writing too. It's a more interesting character if she has her own motivations.
Yeah, and she needs to be a character first.
Oh,
Every
absolutely.
character needs to be a character
Yeah,
first.
and she
and
is
then
a
we
good,
see how they
yeah.
interact. Yeah.
Another thing I was thinking about too, a movie that is actually, if you think about it, is basically Fantastic Four, but way better.
The Incredibles.
I was just exactly.
And yeah, I haven't seen the new one
Me
yet.
neither.
Yeah,
I'm really
but I
stoked
do
about
want to
it.
see that. So,
But thoughts on
just to close down.
Oh yeah, I guess thoughts on Fantastic Four, the movie.
Not a good movie.
It was just awful.
Well, it wasn't awful. I just think there was so much potential and it was wasted.
Yeah,
It was wasted, and that's my least favorite kind of movie.
yeah. I have to say though, I thought the quantum, whatever it is,
The dimension
was
transport.
weak.
Weak.
Well, the whole thing. Oh, or I'm a 7-year-old kid who's got this science lab in my garage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they go to this big science lab, and it's these teenagers running it. It's like there was
and
nobody else
Franklin's not
smarter
really-
in the
yeah.
room.
I don't know. And Franklin's not really like he supervises, but he's not really
Yeah.
there in any of the important scenes.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I mean, I don't
yeah.
want to shit on the movie
Yeah,
anymore.
I'm okay with shitting on that movie. That movie was. I don't even think it's what the director wanted because that
that's what I'm
reshoot,
curious about. Yeah.
Yeah. So just closing down. Next week we're going to be looking at 2017's 2016's Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
That's correct. Another fantastic movie with a fantastic in the title.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them in preparation for the new movie, and also because I'm the hugest Harry Potter fan ever.
Me too. Yeah.
And so, did you want to share actually where people can find you on social media if they want to find you?
Yeah. Oh, I have a Twitter account.
Yeah. So.
I don't actually know.
Okay. Well, if you want to find Nathaniel on Twitter, you can.
Wait.
Leave a comment.
Hang on a second.
Leave a comment.
Let me look this up.
On,
I got the
Cinemasters page. You could probably find Cinemasters on Facebook, and or on just keep liking us on YouTube, or give us a thumbs up or a 5 stars on wherever you're watching us, and we will catch you next time.
It's either Nate Draper or Draper Nate. It's one of those two.
Okay, well, try one of those two and see if you can find him.
It's definitely because the guy who's Draper Nate has Goku.
Okay, so it's definitely Nate Draper
as his profile picture.
So it's Nate Draper.
It's definitely Nate Draper because it's not Goku. It's definitely
not
me.
Goku. So it's Nate Draper, and you're gonna want to follow him if you're a fan of film because he makes his own films and he'll point you in the right direction. And with that, we will see you next time
Bye.
for another Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline. Bye.
Bye.